A man on my porch, a stranger with a sunburned neck and a garish floral shirt, cleared his throat. "I'm sorry. Who are you? This is our property now." He gestured vaguely at the barbecue his family was enjoying on my lawn, the smell of lighter fluid tainting the salt air. "We closed for $1.2 million this morning. You must be the old owner. You really should have cleared out by now." My son, Mark, stood beside him, arms crossed, with a tight, apologetic smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mark let out a short, nervous laugh. "He's just a little confused. Come on, Dad. Time to go." The stranger's wife stopped grilling and stared, her expression a mix of pity and impatience. My son's casual dismissal, spoken as if I were a stray dog that had wandered onto the property, echoed louder than the crashing surf. The finality of it was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. Laughter from the new family's children drifted over, sharp and cruel in the 4th of July heat. The new owner, perhaps sensing my stillness, produced a sheaf of papers. "Look, here's the deed, all signed and filed." Mark patted my shoulder, a gesture not of comfort, but of control. "It's all taken care of, Dad. You got a nice room waiting for you at the facility. Remember, we talked about this." We hadn't, not really. He had talked, and I had been a silent audience to the dismantling of my own life. Neighbors peeked from behind their curtains, witnessing my complete and utter humiliation. But a strange calm settled over me. I looked past Mark, past the strangers inhabiting my life, and out toward the horizon where the sun bled orange into the Pacific. My hands, wrinkled and spotted with age, folded neatly in front of me. A faint smile touched my lips, a private joke only I was in on. I said nothing. The silence was my shield, and in it I felt a flicker of power that Mark, for all his blustering, could never comprehend. He had the deed, but I had the truth. Mark's smug expression faltered, a crack in his well-rehearsed facade. He saw my calm, and it unnerved him. "Dad?" he asked, a note of genuine uncertainty creeping into his voice. I finally turned my gaze from the ocean to meet his. The air drew heavy, thick with the unspoken history between us, with every choice that had led to this precise moment. The tension was a wire pulled taut, about to snap. But months earlier, it all began on a perfectly normal Tuesday, with the scent of salt and brewing coffee. The house wasn't just wood and nails. It was a living thing, breathing with the tides. Its salt-worn cedar siding was the color of driftwood, and the porch floorboards groaned under my weight like an old friend. Every morning, I'd sit on that porch, the same one now occupied by strangers, and drink my coffee. I'd watch the gulls and feel the ghosts of my wife, Judith, beside me. She loved this place more than anything. It was our sanctuary, the heart of our family, built by my grandfather a century ago. Mark's visits had become more frequent, but they lacked warmth. He paced the living room, his phone buzzing incessantly, his eyes scanning the property not with nostalgia, but with the cold calculation of an auctioneer. "You know, Dad, the property taxes on this place are insane," he said one afternoon, peering out at the ocean view. "And the upkeep, it's a fortune. You rattling around in here all alone doesn't make financial sense." He spoke of my life as a line item on a balance sheet he was eager to zero out. He never asked about my health, my friends, or my memories. His conversations were surgical strikes, aimed at dismantling my connection to my home. "Think of the freedom," he'd say. "No more worrying about a leaky roof or a broken furnace. You could have a simple, easy life." His vision of my easy life was a sterile room in a facility, a place where memories went to die. The betrayal wasn't in his words, but in the glaring omission of any love or concern for the man who raised him. On the mantelpiece, next to a faded photo of Judith and me on our wedding day, sat a large glass jar. It was filled to the brim with sea glass, decades of our walks along the shore condensed into a kaleidoscope of soft blues, greens, and ambers. Each piece was a memory, a story only Judith and I knew. The deep blue was from a stormy afternoon in '78. The soft green was the day we learned she was pregnant with Mark. It was our history in a jar. During one of his visits, Mark picked up the jar, weighing it in his hand with a frown. Still got this old thing? He grunted, swirling the contents. The glass pieces clinked together, a sound like distant, fragile bells. It's just a bunch of beach trash, Dad. You should really clear out all this clutter before it's too late. He set it down with a dismissive thud, his eyes already scanning for other, more valuable assets. He saw worthless glass. I saw my entire life with the woman I loved. The sting of his comment lingered long after he left. To him, my most cherished possession was clutter. It was a stark reminder that we lived in different worlds. His was a world of market values and capital gains. Mine was a world of sentimental value, where a piece of glass could hold more worth than a stock certificate. That evening, I ran my hand over the cool, smooth surface of the jar, feeling a profound and sudden loneliness. The house felt colder, emptier than before. A week later, Mark arrived with a manila envelope and a practiced, serious expression. Dad, we need to talk about your well-being, he began, spreading a document on the kitchen table. This is a medical power of attorney. It's just a formality. It will allow me to speak with your doctors. Make sure you're getting the best care if, something happens. He made it sound like a loving son's duty, a safety net woven from pure concern. The legal jargon swam before my 81-year-old eyes. He tapped a line on the last page with his pen. Just sign here. It's standard procedure. He was rushing me, his voice smooth and reassuring, a tactic he'd learned in his years as a struggling sales consultant. My vision wasn't sharp enough to parse the dense paragraphs of legalese, but my trust in my only son was, at that moment, still intact. I hesitated, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. It's just for medical stuff, Dad. Nothing else, he added, looking me straight in the eye. Against my better judgment, I picked up the pen. The trust a father has for his son is a powerful, blinding force. I thought of Judith and how she always believed in the good in Mark, even when it was hard to see. For her, I signed my name on the line he indicated. He quickly whisked the paper away, folding it neatly and placing it back in the envelope. Great, he said, his relief palpable. That's all taken care of. A chill, unrelated to the sea breeze, crept down my spine. The following month, things began to accelerate. I started receiving mail addressed to the estate of Howard Miller, as if I were already dead. Calls from financial advisors I'd never heard of, asking to speak with Mark about my portfolio. Each instance was a small cut, bleeding my autonomy away drop by drop. When I confronted Mark, he'd wave it away. Just clerical errors, Dad. I'm sorting it out. Don't you worry about a thing. His reassurances felt increasingly hollow, like echoes in an empty room. I remember one call vividly. A woman from my bank's fraud department, Mr. Miller, were just calling to verify a recent transfer request of $12,500 from your savings account. My heart hammered against my ribs. I hadn't requested any transfer. My son Mark is handling my finances now, I found myself saying, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. He said he was consolidating accounts. The woman paused. Very well, sir. The transfer will proceed. I hung up feeling like a fool and a passenger in my own life. The quiet betrayal was worse than an open fight. It was a campaign of 1,000 paper cuts. He'd bring groceries, but I'd later notice my fine silver, which had been in Judith's family for generations, was missing from the sideboard. He'd arrange for a landscaper, but then the man would ask me about getting the property ready for sale. Mark was dismantling my life piece by piece, all while wearing the mask of a devoted, caring son. He was counting on me being too old, too tired, or too sad to notice. My days grew heavier with a silent dread. I started documenting everything in an old ledger. The date of the medical power of attorney, the missing silver, the odd phone calls. It felt foolish, like a child's diary of injustices. But it was the only form of control I had left. I wrote down Mark's justifications and my own creeping suspicions. The pages filled with a narrative of gaslighting and greed. I felt like I was collecting evidence for a crime no one would ever believe had been committed. The first major public humiliation came on a bright May morning. I was tending to Judith's hydrangeas when a car I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. A man in a cheap suit got out, quit-ord in hand, followed by Mark. Dad, this is Mr. Gable, an appraiser. Mark announced, not meeting my eye. Just getting an updated value for insurance purposes. You know how these coastal properties are. He was lying. I could see it in the slight tremor in his hand. The way he avoided looking at the house, Mr. Gable moved through my home with a detached professionalism, measuring rooms, tapping walls, and making notes. He was assessing its bones, its marketability, while completely ignoring its soul. My neighbors, watering their lawns and collecting their mail, watched the whole affair. I could feel their stares, a mixture of curiosity and pity. I was the old man whose son was circling, the topic of hushed conversations over backyard fences. My private life had been turned into a public spectacle of decline. Mark followed the appraiser around, pointing out features with the enthusiasm of a seasoned realtor. And the view from this master bedroom is easily worth an extra 100,000, I heard him say. He wasn't talking about the sunrise I had watched with my wife for 50 years. He was talking about a selling point. He was selling my memories. After they left, the house felt violated, its quiet dignity stripped away. The scent of the appraiser's cheap cologne lingered in the air, a foul counterpoint to the clean, salt breeze. That evening, my neighbor Carol stopped by, a plate of cookies in her hand as a pretext. Howard, I don't mean to be a busybody, she began, her kind face etched with worry. But I saw Mark's car at the marina yesterday. He was with that aggressive developer, the one who wants to put up those high-rise condos. I overheard him say something about unlocking capital before his father becomes a bigger problem. The words landed like stones in my gut. A bigger problem, that's what I was to him. I called Mark immediately, my hand shaking so much I could barely dial. When I confronted him with what Carol had said, his voice was chillingly calm. Dad, you can't listen to town gossip. Mrs. Gable is a nosy old hen. I am looking out for you, and only you. This house is too much for you to maintain. I turned a burden into cash for your retirement. Be grateful. The word burden echoed in my ear. He didn't deny it. He justified it. He had already made the decision. I was just an obstacle. The next day, Mark dropped off some groceries. He was in a hurry, his usual frantic energy amplified. As he rushed back to his car, a folder slid from his passenger seat onto the driveway. He didn't notice. After he drove off, I walked over and picked it up. Inside was a pre-listing agreement with a high-end real estate agency. It detailed a marketing plan, commission structures, and a target listing price of $1.2 million. My home, my life, all laid out in cold. Transactional detail. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was a signed document. Staring at the agreement, a strange clarity pierced through my grief and fear. The fog of denial lifted. My son was not just misguided. He was actively and methodically stripping me of everything I held dear for his own financial gain. He saw me not as his father, but as a final, lucrative project. The document in my hand was his business plan. Holding it, I felt the last vestiges of my naive trust in him crumble to dust, replaced by a cold, hard resolve I hadn't felt in years. I knew then I couldn't fight him on his terms. He was younger, faster, and had the law, or so he thought, on his side. My first thought was to find a lawyer. I called the number for a local firm that specialized in elder law, my voice trembling slightly. I explained the situation to a paralegal, who listened with practiced patience. She scheduled an appointment for the following week, a small beacon of hope. For a few days, I clung to the idea that a legal expert could untangle this mess and restore my life. The lawyer's office was stuffy, smelling of old paper and stale coffee. Mr. Davies, a man younger than my son, listened to my story, his face a mask of professional sympathy. I showed him the pre-listing agreement. This is troubling, Howard, he said, steepling his fingers. But without concrete proof, he's acting against your interests under the POA. It's his word against yours. A judge might see a son managing his aging father's burdensome assets. My hope began to curdle into a familiar despair. He asked for the power of attorney document. I admitted, with a fresh wave of shame, that Mark had taken the only copy after I signed it. Mr. Davies sighed. Well, we can file to see it, but he can stall. Mark can claim you're becoming forgetful, paranoid even. It gets messy and expensive very quickly. We could be looking at a competency hearing. He was telling me that my mind, my very sanity, would be put on trial. The safety net Mark had created was actually a cage. The legal fees were staggering, a retainer of $15,000 just to start. Mark had been systematically draining my savings, leaving me with barely enough to live on, let alone fund a protracted legal battle against him. The crushing irony was that he was using my own money to steal the rest of my money. The system I had trusted, the laws meant to protect people like me, were now a weapon turned against me. The hope I had carried into that office evaporated, leaving a cold, heavy dread. I walked out of that office defeated. The path to justice was a toll road I couldn't afford. That evening, as a storm rolled in off the coast, the house felt cavernous. The wind howled, rattling the window panes like angry spirits. I sat in the dark living room, the jar of sea glass on the coffee table before me. It caught the faint moonlight, glimmering softly. It felt like Judah's last gift, a silent testament to a life that was being erased. My lowest point had arrived. I picked up the jar, its weight familiar and comforting. My fingers traced the smooth, frosted edges of the glass inside. Each piece a memory. The pale aqua from our honeymoon, the dark green from the day Mark was born, teaching Mark how to surf on that very beach, his small hand in mine as we waded into the waves. The contrast between that memory and the man he had become was a physical pain, a sharp, unyielding ache in my chest. The jar now felt less like a collection of memories and more like a tombstone. The for sale sign appeared a week later. It was hammered into my front lawn while I was out getting groceries, a bold, garish declaration of my obsolescence. The realtor, a woman with a terrifyingly white smile, came by with brochures. She spoke to me in condescending tones, as if I were a piece of furniture that came with the house. "We'll be sure to give you plenty of notice before showings, Howard. We don't want to disturb your nap time." Every word with a calculated insult, designed to reinforce my helplessness. Showings became a regular violation. Strangers paraded through my home, opening closets, peering into medicine cabinets, judging the life Judith and I had built. They spoke of tearing down walls, of gut renovations, of erasing every trace of us. Mark would often be there, orchestrating the performance, highlighting the good bones and development potential. He treated me like a ghost, floating through the rooms, completely invisible to him and his potential buyers. The ticking clock was deafening. A sale was imminent. One afternoon, a young couple was touring the house. Mark was with them, laying on the charm. I retreated to the sunroom, trying to read, but their voices carried. I overheard Mark talking to his wife on the phone in the hallway, his voice low and conspiratorial. "The offer is solid. Another week and the deed is recorded. Once the wire transfer clears, we can finally get out of debt. This is it, honey, our new life." He wasn't just selling a house. He was cashing in my life to pay for his. His words, "get out of debt," were the key. It wasn't about my well-being or the burden of the house. It was about his own financial desperation. He had failed in his own life and saw me as his bailout. The justification he'd fed me, "it's too much for him to maintain," was a lie to mask his own greed and failure. The discovery didn't make me angry. It made me cold. The emotional, grieving father was gone, replaced by a man with a singular, chilling purpose. He had declared war, and I was finally ready to fight back. That night, unable to sleep, I found myself staring at the jar of sea glass again. Something about its quiet resilience spoke to me. Judith had been meticulous, a planner in all things. She never did anything without a reason. Why this jar? Why did she insist on keeping it on the mantel, always in sight? I emptied the contents onto the old oak table, the glass pieces spreading out like jewels. They were sorted by color, by size, a lifetime of patience, shimmering under the lamplight. As I ran my fingers through the glass, I felt something different. A piece that wasn't glass. It was a small, tightly rolled scroll of parchment, no bigger than my thumb, sealed with wax and tucked deep within the pile of dark green shards. It was designed to be overlooked, to feel like just another part of the collection. My heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm. The wax seal was embossed with the insignia of the county clerk's office. This was no sentimental keepsake. With trembling hands, I carefully broke the seal and unrolled the parchment. The text was dense, typed on an old manual typewriter. It was a notarized deed, but not just any deed. It was a quitclaim deed, dated March 12, 2019, just a year before Judith passed. In it, she had transferred her 50% ownership of the property not to me, and not to Mark, but into an irrevocable trust. A trust that had a very specific, ironclad clause she had written herself, with a lawyer's help. The clause stated that the property could not be sold, transferred, or leveraged as long as I, Howard Miller, resided in it as my primary residence. Upon my death or permanent relocation to a care facility, full ownership would then transfer to Mark. She had foreseen his greed. She had seen the weakness in her son that my fatherly love had blinded me to. This piece of paper, hidden in her jar of beach trash, was her final act of love and protection for me. It was a shield from beyond the grave. But there was a problem. The deed had been signed and notarized, but had it been recorded with the county? If not, it was just a piece of paper. The next morning, I drove to the county records office, the parchment tucked safely in my breast pocket. The air in the archives was thick with the musty smell of old paper. A clerk, a young woman with kind eyes, helped me search the digital database. We searched by name, by address, by date. Nothing. A cold wave of despair washed over me. It was never filed. The clerk saw the look on my face. Sometimes old paper records don't get digitized properly, she offered. Let me check the microfiche archives from 2019. It's a long shot. She led me to a dusty machine in the corner and began scrolling through reels of film. Minutes stretched into an eternity. I watched images of deeds and titles flash by, a blur of officialdom. My hope dwindled with each passing frame. Judith, my brilliant Judith, had made one crucial error. My victory was snatched away before it even began. Wait. The clerk breathed, her finger tracing a line on the screen. Here it is. Miller, Judith A. Quitclaim deed. Recorded March 13th, 2019, at 11:42 a.m. It was there. It was real. It was legal. She printed a certified copy for me. The paper was still warm from a machine as I held it. It was more than a document. It was a weapon. It was Judith's voice, speaking across time, clear and powerful. The title search Mark's lawyers had done was flawed. They had only searched for my name, not hers. Suddenly, the power of attorney he'd tricked me into signing became clear. Mark knew he couldn't sell the entire house, only my 50% share. But who would buy half a house with a lifetime tenancy clause attached? No one. So he'd used a different document. He needed to control me, not the property itself. I drove home, a cold, calculated plan forming in my mind. Hiring a lawyer wasn't about fighting anymore. It was about executing a perfectly laid trap. I found a new lawyer. Not a gentle elder law specialist, but a shark. A real estate litigator named Miss Vera Rostova, known for her merciless tactics and exorbitant fees, which I was now happy to pay. I walked into her sleek, modern office and laid the certified copy of Judith's deed on her glass desk. I didn't tell her the whole story. I just said, my son has fraudulently sold the property using a power of attorney. Half of that property belongs to an irrevocable trust. I want to void the sale. Ms. Rostova's eyes lit up as she read the documents, a predator sensing a fatal weakness in her prey. The power of attorney, she asked, her voice sharp. Do you have it? I shook my head. It doesn't matter, she said with a razor-thin smile. I'll get it. But there's a bigger issue. The title insurance company that guaranteed a clear title to the new buyers. They're on the hook for over $1 million. They made a catastrophic error. They're going to be very, very motivated to fix this. The plan was simple and brutal. We would let the sale close. We would let Mark get the money, and then, the day after the new owners officially recorded their faulty deed, Ms. Rostova, would file an emergency injunction and a suit to quiet title, naming my son, the buyers, and the title insurance company as defendants. The title company's legal department would descend on my son like a pack of wolves, not just to recover the $1.2 million, but to pursue him for fraud. Ms. Rostova then did her own digging. She subpoenaed the power of attorney for Mark's files, and what she found was even better than I could have imagined. "Mr. Miller," she said over the phone, her voice dripping with satisfaction, "this isn't a general power of attorney. It's a medical power of attorney. It only gives him authority over your healthcare decisions. It gives him zero authority over real estate transactions. Mark, in his arrogant haste, had used the wrong form. The entire sale was built on a foundation of sand. The final week was an exercise in supreme self-control. Mark was insufferably cheerful, talking about the smooth transition and how happy I would be in my new community. He brought me brochures for the assisted living facility, pointing out the scheduled activities in the dinner menu as if they were perks at a resort. "See, Dad? Bingo on Tuesdays. You love bingo." I smiled and nodded, playing the part of the docile, forgetful old man to perfection, all while the gears of my revenge were grinding silently into place. The day of the closing, Mark called me. "It's done, Dad. The money is in the bank. I've already paid the deposit on your new place. The movers will be there Monday." His voice was giddy with success. This was his final insult, his victory lap. He took one last greedy action, moving my own money to secure my own prison. He was completely unaware that the trap, so carefully set by his mother years ago, was about to spring shut. I let him believe he had won. "That's wonderful, son," I said, my voice even and calm. "You've taken such good care of everything." I hung up the phone and looked out at the ocean. The smell of salt and sunscreen was thick in the air. It was 4th of July weekend. The new family, the one Mark had sold my life to, was scheduled to arrive the next day to celebrate. The stage for his public humiliation was set, and I was ready for the curtain to rise. My heart was a block of ice. And that brought us back to the porch, me, standing silently as Mark tried to manage the mess he'd created. The new owner, whose name I learned was Stan, was growing impatient, waving his fraudulent deed like a fan against the humid air. "Mark, you told us he'd be gone. We have a house full of furniture arriving in an hour." Stan's wife corralled their children, shushing them as they asked loudly why the old man was still here. The perfect family celebration was curdling before it even began. Mark grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Dad, let's go. Now, you're making a scene." His voice was a low hiss, meant only for me. The mask of the caring son had slipped completely, revealing the desperate, cornered man beneath. He was trying to physically remove me, to bundle me into his car and dispose of the problem. But I didn't move. I was an anchor moored to the spot by decades of memory and a single powerful secret. I just looked at him, my faint smile never wavering. Just then, a sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb. Miss Rostova stepped out, looking immaculate in a steel gray suit that seemed to defy the summer heat. She carried a leather briefcase. Behind her, a grin-faced man in a courier's uniform followed, holding a clipboard. They walked up the path with an unhurried, deliberate pace that commanded attention. The barbecue chatter on the lawn died down. All eyes turned to the newcomers. Mark's face went pale. He released my arm as if it were red hot. "Mark Miller?" Ms. Rostova's voice was like ice. It cut through the humid air, sharp and clear. Mark could only nod, his mouth suddenly dry. "I am Vera Rostova. I represent the Judith A. Miller Trust, which, as of March 13, 2019, holds a 50% unseverable interest in this property." She gestured to the house. "You have been served." The courier stepped forward and handed Mark a thick stack of documents. The lawsuit, the injunction, the whole beautiful, terrible package. Stan, the new owner, sputtered. "What is this? What trust? We have a clean title. The title company guaranteed it." Miss Rostova turned her cool gaze on him. "Then your legal quarrel is with Fidelity National Title and Mr. Miller here," she said, nodding at Mark. because the sale of this property was fraudulent from its inception, executed with an invalid medical power of attorney, an indirect violation of a recorded deed. Your title insurance is about to become very expensive for them. Gut. Mark fumbled with the papers, his face a mask of disbelief. Medical. No, it was a general POA. I had the authority. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for the first time in years. He was searching for the confused old man he had created, the father who would back down, who would smooth things over. He found a stranger. He found a man made of granite and sea salt, a man who had been pushed past his breaking point and had come out the other side, harder than before. Miss Rostova wasn't finished. She produced another document from her briefcase, a certified copy of the medical power of attorney. This document, Mr. Miller, allowed you to discuss your father's cholesterol levels with his cardiologist. It did not, however, empower you to liquidate his primary real estate asset. She let the words hang in the air, each one a hammer blow to Mark's crumbling reality. The neighbors were no longer peeking. They were standing on their lawns, watching the drama unfold. Stan's wife began to cry. Their dream home, their holiday weekend, had just imploded. "What does this mean?" she wailed at her husband. "It means," Miss Rostova answered for him, "that you do not own this house. The $1.2 million you paid has been transferred into a frozen account pending litigation. You will have to sue the title company to get it back. I would suggest you remove your barbecue from my client's lawn." Her client. She meant the trust. She meant me. Mark finally broke. The documents slipped from his numb fingers and scattered across the porch steps. "Dad, please," he whispered, the sound pathetic and hollow. "They'll ruin me. I'm in debt. I needed the money." It was the truth, finally. Not a justification, but a raw, ugly confession. He didn't do it for me. He didn't do it because it was for the best. He did it for himself. He had been willing to make me homeless to solve his own problems. I looked at my son, this 50-year-old man who had never truly grown up, and I felt nothing. Not pity, not anger, not even sadness. Just a vast, cold emptiness where a father's love used to be. The betrayal had been so absolute that it had cauterized the wound, leaving behind only scar tissue. "You should have thought of that earlier," I said, my voice steady. It was the first time I had spoken since this final confrontation began. Ms. Rostova gave a crisp nod to the courier, who turned to Stan. "I am also authorized to serve you with a notice of eviction," he said politely. "You and your family have 24 hours to vacate the premises." The finality of it was brutal. Stan and his family were collateral damage in a war they hadn't known they were a part of. I felt a brief pang of sympathy for them, but it was quickly eclipsed by the righteousness of my cause. They would get their money back. I was getting my life back. As Stan began arguing with the courier and his wife herded their bewildered children toward their car, Mark sank onto the porch steps, head in his hands. He was a ruined man. He would be hounded by the title company's lawyers for years. He would likely face criminal charges for fraud. He had gambled everything on my weakness, and in doing so, had lost everything. He had dismissed my white jar of sea glass as trash, never imagining the treasure and the justice it held within. I turned my back on him. I walked past the scattered legal papers, past the cooling barbecue, and back toward my front door. The house seemed to welcome me, its familiar scent of old wood, salt, and Judith's faint, lingering perfume wrapping around me like a warm embrace. Miss Rostova held the door open for me. "The title company will call you to offer a settlement," she said quietly. "Do not take it. We will own them by the time this is over. They will pay for your son's fraud." Inside, I walked to the mantel. The empty sea glass jar sat there waiting. I had left the contents on the dining table. I went and gathered up the smooth, colorful pieces, letting them run through my fingers one last time. The small rolled-up deed from Judith was a testament to her foresight. She knew our son, she knew me, and she had found a way to save me, even after she was gone. I smiled, a real smile this time, full of love and gratitude for the incredible woman I had married. I poured the sea glass back into the jar. The sound of the pieces clinking together was no longer melancholic. It was a sound of victory, of resilience, of a love that transcended even death and betrayal. Each piece was a memory, and my memories were safe now. They couldn't be sold or appraised or erased. They were mine. This house was mine. My life was mine. My wife, Judith, a quiet compass in my life, had guided me through the storm one last time. From the window, I watched as the strangers packed up their belongings, their holiday ruined. I watched my son, still sitting on the steps, a solitary figure in the wreckage of his own making. He looked up, and our eyes met through the glass. There was no apology in his gaze, only a hollowed-out shock. He still didn't understand how it had happened, how the quiet, forgetful old man had so utterly defeated him. He had underestimated me. More importantly, he had underestimated his mother. Miss Rostova's black sedan drove away. The courier followed. The new family, now the old family, pulled out of my driveway, leaving tire marks on the asphalt. The only one left was Mark. He stood up slowly, a man with no future, and walked toward his own car without a backward glance. He was now someone else's problem. The title company's problem, the bank's problem, the district attorney's problem. He was no longer mine. The filial bond had been irrevocably broken. The setting sun cast long shadows across the lawn. The air was quiet now, save for the gentle rhythm of the waves crashing on the shore. It was the sound of my life, the sound of my home, and it was a sound I would get to keep. The smell of salt and sunscreen lingered, but the smell of my son's deceit was finally gone. I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me, the first in many, many months. Justice had been done. I went to the kitchen and put on a pot of coffee. The evening light filled the room, turning the familiar space into something golden and new. The house felt bigger, cleaner. It was mine again, fully and completely. The fight was over. I had faced the ultimate betrayal and had not only survived, but triumphed. The victory wasn't just in keeping my home. It was in reclaiming my dignity, my agency, and my peace of mind. Judith had given me the weapon, but I had wielded it. I took my coffee out onto the porch, my porch, and sat in my usual chair. The boards groaned in welcome. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. A cool evening breeze rustled the leaves of the old oak tree in the yard. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, the warmth spreading through me. Then I reached over and firmly locked the front door.